Good evening, everyone. This is Tracie Halcrombe with the Roundtable. We will be discussing tonight mental health literacy and how can we end the stigma. We do have some professionals in the mental health space. We have Kamina Griffin, who is a licensed mental health therapist. We have Tiffany Gibson, who is an associate licensed professional counselor. We have Ratoya Mason, who is a licensed professional counselor. And we do have Jane Zeal, who is a licensed social worker and a certified trauma specialist. Welcome to the panelists. We're glad you're here with us this evening. What we do know about mental health literacy is that it's increasing attention as a useful tool for helping us reduce stigma and enhance help seeking behaviors. However, there is something missing. We are going to expound on that this evening. We're going to find out here, hopefully, how we can bridge the gap and helping to end the stigma. And why is there a stigma? Despite the attention with the mental health literacy intervention, once again, something is missing. Kamina, as well as all the platform. How can we shift from mental health literacy viewed as the disorder, the risk factors, and how can the constructs promote positive mental health?
Well, when I look at mental health and broadening the literacy spectrum, I feel like it all starts at normalizing these things. Because just like with medical conditions, people are open to say, I have high blood pressure, or I struggle with this, or I struggle with that. We need to make mental health on the same level, even greater, to say, I'm struggling with these things, I'm going through these situations, I need help, and then give people the tools to know where to go to get the help. So knowing diagnoses, what the symptoms look like, and that's going to take a team effort for everybody to kind of grow that normalcy.
All right. Mm-hmm. And I agree with Kamina in terms of normalizing mental health. And she started to compare mental health. We think about with our physical being, if we're sick or if we have high blood pressure, we automatically know that we need to seek medical attention. Or if our car is broken, we know that we need to take it to the mechanic. But for some reason, when we're not feeling well mentally, there's a hesitation in terms of, well, how do I get well mentally? And I think that adding additional resources and having the conversations in hopes to normalize that, I think that that's the start of hoping to end mental health literacy or to be able to, promote that.
Amen. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I
Tiffany?
think it's good to start at school age because, the young kids are our future. And the more we can provide that information or educate them on understanding their feelings and teaching them the skills that they need in order to be successful, beyond the educational as far as, math, science, and social studies, there's that social piece that they need in the schools. And I think that we're at a good position that we have school counselors in all schools. Many school systems have social workers to where we can go and teach those social and emotional skills to them so they'll know when they're feeling down where they can go for help. And then again, those resources that are available in our communities for them.
That is awesome. Jane, what would you have to add?
I appreciate all these comments very much, and I agree with them. From my perspective, I'm becoming more aware of the notion of the autonomic nervous system and the human stress response and what type of symptoms we have from chronic exposure to stress, acute exposure to stress, and I would love to see a shift in that direction in the discussion, not this discussion, but in the national discussion about, what it's like to have a sympathetic nervous system that reacts to stress. What's it like to have overwhelming stress that doesn't ever go away? And I would like to nationally move the conversation in that direction away from personality disorders, chemical imbalances in the brain, the bad person. That's so stigmatizing. And I think a lot of these mental health disorders can be understood through the lens of acute or chronic exposure to stress.
We do know that that's so true. We know that stress is definitely a factor in mental health. What's interesting, and what I've heard everyone say this evening at this point, is that what we're seeing still does not signify to us why aren't we talking about mental health literacy. If we do know all these things exist, we talked about social and emotional, the learning aspect. We talked about how we know if our car is broke down, how we would get help, and how the nervous system would affect us in mental health. What about the things that keep us from having the conversation, such as not just being a label, such as not just mentioning the recovery aspect of getting people well, but how do we talk to our family, our friends, our loved ones? How do we continue our coping?
Well, I think a lot of that stems from originally, so we know mental health, like recently after the pandemic, has become more of an acceptable topic to even have. So you have to consider the generation before that who, shun people for having feelings, not crying, things aren't wrong. And so we're trying to get our youth to, understanding and learning, and they're more open to it, but they still are under parents and grandparents and aunts and cousins and uncles that still they don't understand. So education is key. What I like to tell a lot of my patients is the things that we experience, the emotions that we experience, everybody has it. It's just, is it a typical reaction or disorderly? It's a spectrum. And a lot of people don't understand. They're like, oh my God, I'm not depressed because I don't want to kill myself, or they think it's extreme. Like they just can't have the symptoms. And so I think just explaining and educating, hey, it's normal to have these symptoms. These things happen to you. That's part of being a human. Like anxiety. Well, I don't know if I have anxiety. Everybody has anxiety. Is it disorderly or not? And so I feel like if we can spread the education around to the youth and on, then when the children decide to open up to parents, the parents can be receptive, because if the parents aren't, that's going to keep the child from saying things because of that. So that's why I said it's a group effort. Everybody has to contribute and learn for it to be successful.
I agree. Who else would like to add? This is definitely a good topic.
Yeah, I think you also have to look at that cultural piece, especially when you're talking about the African American culture, to where it is a stigma. And I think a lot of it goes back to our religion. And when you are having older parents or your grandparents, and we've always been told you can pray it out of you, go to God, and that's fine. You can go to God, but I think you've mentioned previously, you can also see that counselor as well. Because as they mentioned earlier, if you're going to a heart surgeon for your heart, okay, you can go to a therapist for your mind, to make sure you're able to function life and handle some of the stressors that are coming. So I think it's gonna take a while for that stigma, especially in our culture. But I think that we've come a long way with people opening up, because at this point, many people are having to face, okay, my child is attempted to commit, or attempted to commit suicide. And so that's something that parents are faced with now. So they can either, run away from it and something happens, or they can deal with it and get their child the help that they need.
I agree. And I would just like to say right now, if there is anything that is triggering in this conversation, please step away from the television and get the help. Take a moment if this is something that is triggering, because the conversations can include conversations with suicide involved in the conversation. We are still talking about mental health literacy, but this does run a gamut of mental health issues and relations.
And just to add to that, Tracie, in terms of the mental health aspect and just working to educate, COVID was probably the most unfortunate thing that I've experienced in my lifetime. But one of the effects of COVID that it has brought about the discussion in terms of mental health, because we've seen a lot of the effects after COVID in terms of the anxiety and the depression and things of the sort. But also, we're living in a generation that's technologically savvy. Everything operates from a phone, from a computer. And so in that, I think that we're also at an advantage when it comes to getting the word out, talking more about mental health, using that as our vehicle to have those conversations, not only in the schools and the classrooms, but also on the jobs. We have insurance that we pay for that we probably don't think about going to seek a therapist. Well, again, we would go to, to a medical doctor, but we don't necessarily look at that insurance as seeking out mental health attention. So in that, having those conversations, not just in the classroom, but working to get on jobs and having those conversations with them as well.
Jane, is something you would like to add?
Well, I agree again, with the comments. In terms of this intergenerational piece, it's quite tricky. Whether it's Black culture, I come from Eastern European immigrants, first generation. The mantra in that generation is fit in, that kind of thing. And make us proud. But, I would love to somehow get into the cultural conversation the whole notion of compassion and the notion of trauma that's decontextualized. You look at someone and you're like, what do you mean? You had a good day, you have a car, what's the problem? But trauma is decontextualized, and sometimes it's multi-generational, right? When we appreciate the hardships multi-generationally that people have experienced, right, we can then begin to say, makes sense. Anybody would feel that way, including your parents, right?
I agree with all of that. We have come through some hard times in all our cultures and in all our families, and we don't know where a lot of the displaced, whether it be anger or the emotions of things that they did not even expect to be happening to them at ages that we are now experiencing more with the younger people as well. But we do know that there are many studies on mental health literacy that focus on children and adolescents and young adults. Why is there a lack of information on or about mental health literacy for the adults, the elderly, or those with specific disorders? What would you think?
Right. And I just recently found that out as well. And I guess just from what we've already said, like the youth is our future, so we want to make sure that we're taking care of them. I feel like this new generation has had more, have been more vocal about their mental health, suicide attempts, being, put on medications. Like, I just feel like this generation has had more of it going on, but it is surprising because older populations do commit a lot of suicide as well and have mental health issues with, facing the end of their life and chronic pain and things like that. So I know recently I read an article saying that they are trying to gain more information on that. And I think, again, the pandemic kind of opened the eyes up to everybody, like, okay, we need to look at everybody and not just the youth, because it seems like we always try and just get the youth. But again, it's all connected. We're talking about the, generational things, and all of it's connected, so we have to touch everybody.
Yeah, I think just to add, I think mental health has come a long way in the last 20 years. So when you look at the ages of some of our family members who are older, I just don't think a lot of information was readily available for them, or they weren't in a position to where they could receive that information. So I think that has a lot to do with the older population.
I would say so too, especially with social media being the forefront. In a moment, we're going to take a break, and we are going to be coming back shortly with some more of mental health literacy and how can we end the stigma. This is Tracie Halcrombe, your host with the Roundtable. And we're back with the Roundtable with Tracie Halcrombe, your host. And we do have some mental health professionals. If you've been watching already, we have Kamina Griffin, we have Tiffany Gibson, Ritoya Mason, and Jane Zeal, all in their own rightful capacities in the mental health profession. And we're going to continue our conversation on mental health literacy and how can we end the stigma. This next question I just wanted to ask, how do you all think we can introduce positive mental health as an integral component of mental health services in concepts and theory?
Okay. I think it's important that it's introduced in to a lot of different career fields that deal with people with mental health, like, emergency EMTs and police officers and just people that are going to be encountering people that might be having a manic episode or has an intellectual disability. Like, they need to know what the signs are, what they look like. So just like when we go to a new job and there's trainings we have to watch or exercises we have to do, that needs to be part of the package. We need to have videos and activities and, make it engaging, role play, but it needs to be part of the package of, okay, when you work at this facility, it could be a regular job because you'll have coworkers that'll have, signs of things. And so I feel like that would be a great start to kind of add it into just normal job trainings across fields in general.
That is so important. We train on mental health first aid, and I know some of you are very familiar with that. They have a youth component. They have an adult component. My organization, Joy Inside Tears, does the certification for adult. We will be soon doing the youth and teen. However, what you just said, do you think that has a lot to do with, that's your EAP, isn't it? Your Employee Assistance Program.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so
well, the Employee Assistance Program usually is just giving the employees usually like free 6 sessions or something in case they're having, but it doesn't teach you how to see signs of depression or burnout with a coworker, or if you have a client or customer come in, like signs of distress. So that's what I feel like needs to be part of the education, is the signs. What does it look like? What can it look like? What are some words somebody would say if they're in distress or they're trying to tell you something without telling you something? Like, those things are important to know. Or what does somebody with autism look like? Or somebody with another mental health disorder or intellectual disorder look like, especially for police officers. They're not being defiant, they have a disorder. So let's, treat them differently. This is how you talk to somebody like that. Like, stuff like that is what I feel like will be very beneficial.
I think that is great. And I want to say one more time, we train in mental health first aid. That is knowing the signs and symptoms. This is why this is such a very important topic for me, and as well as the community at large. We need training on, as Kamina just added, signs and symptoms. We need to know what to recognize. And if you're taking a course in mental health first aid, it's just like CPR. No one is out here having heart attacks every day and just dropping dead, but you would know what to do from CPR certification.
Yes.
So this is what mental health first aid does. We'll move on to Tiffany. What do you think about
I
that?
think that's really good information. I do know there are many industries now that have they have contracted counselors that are available for their employees. They are training employees on mental health awareness. Also, if someone in the community, I do know locally true that if you have someone who may be on the spectrum or have severe mental health issues, you can contact the police department. They have a program where they can be on, I can't remember the name of it, but on a list, so that if they're ever called to the home is flagged. So they'll know that someone in there has some struggles, so they'll know how to handle the person when they get there. So I do know they have a program. I can't think of the name of it, but I do know there's one locally here.
And I agree with the two in terms of the training. One of the differences, and I always equate the difference in mental health to the physical because it's the most practical way to explain it. When we think about if we broke our leg, like we can look and say, oh my God, there's a broken leg, something's wrong with this person. But when it comes to mental health, it doesn't look a certain way. Now the behaviors comes out so that we can be able to identify something is different, but we can't always immediately see some type of a mental health concern as we could with something in the physical. And so having that training to look for the signs of distress, key words that a person may say, certain types of behavior that they may project, those are some important things that we, especially, and again, the world that we're living in, when we think about how mental health is, how we're working to be more aware, but also how it's on the rise with the different concerns that we have. The training is so necessary in every capacity,
And I would add, because I am this trauma-informed therapist, that training at any level has to include the person who's trying to help paying attention to their own internal signals, because if we're dysregulated, we're not going to be able to regulate somebody else, right? And I've often thought that it would be a wonderful thing to include, like in school curriculums or employee training manuals, nonviolent communication skills. We're such an aggressive, competitive culture, and and we've got this achieve, and I'm going to get there before you get there, and it just creates this, ugh in people's guts, right? And it's just so unpleasant, and I think it contributes, if somebody's already having a miserable life and then they go to work and, they're encountering that, it's a bad slide down.
This was some great input. Thank you, ladies. This was some great input. Well, we're going to also move on. I want to know about some of the components of mental health, because we know some of them are in the problem solving and self-actualization, the autonomy, the relatedness and interpersonal relationship skills. Let's talk about that. Like even the person themselves that are suffering and have a challenge. And we know a lot of us are suffering in silence. So I just want to just delve into some of the things, the competence in that and the problem solving, even with them. How are they even able to, if it is your young adult, to articulate what's happening with them so that someone can get them the help that they need?
That's a great question. I feel like acceptance is a big part of that. I talk about that all the time till I'm blue in the face with my patients. If you can't accept your current reality and the emotion that you're currently feeling, you can't move any farther than that. And so being able to name it, naming it as though saying it, I'm sad, I'm excited, I'm worried, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed. Accepting it, looking at the pieces factually of this is the reasons for this and why, then you can figure out how to move forward from there. But the basis has to be the acceptance of that reality, and being able to name where you are. And then, there's just steps from there, but that's the basis.
I would agree. Just recognizing feelings and emotions. I know normally in the first couple of sessions I would have with a client is just recognizing basic things. What does love mean? What does it look like? What does it mean to be confused? And those type of things with my clients. So yeah, definitely recognizing and them being able to express themselves, and just basically knowing where to go for help when they know they're not feeling right, if that makes sense. They feeling a little different. Just knowing how it feels and where they can go.
That's great information.
Yes, creating safety is the bigger part of it, but first is the accepting of what is it that I'm feeling. And since we're kind of talking about clients, one of the things for me is important to understand. Give me a feeling word. What are you feeling right now, so that we can be more in tune. I always say that self is probably the hardest person to sit in the room with, but it's so necessary so that we can be in tune with our emotions. And I think that's also a little bit maybe as to the downside of not really understanding how we feel, because we're so distracted by other things. We really can't identify with that. But accepting and understanding our feelings, accepting that feeling, but also understanding that we have to create safety for ourselves. And that may be seeking help in, whether that's a teacher or a parent, confiding, having that safe space to be able to go and be honest about what we feel. That's also a necessary piece in addition to acceptance.
Community is everything. There's no doubt about that. I would also add, in terms of the feeling component, is body sensations also as a way back to oneself. And I have found when a client is struggling or confused and they're trying to get some narrative out, I will often just close my eyes and go, okay, so I'm trying to figure out what does that feel like in my body? Well, this is what I feel like in my body when I think about myself in that situation. what's going on in your body? Particularly because we live in such a traumatically, really traumatic culture, people lift out of their bodies. They don't want to be in their bodies. It's too painful. It's too confusing. But that's where all the power lies, right?
Yes. Yes.
That is where all the power lies. This is really, really a great conversation. Once again, we're trying to make sure everyone who's watching and viewing understands that the stigma can be ended. And a lot of what we're saying right now, it does start even in this conversation with ourselves, with the acceptance of ourselves, the understanding that if there's something wrong, we can seek help. If there's something wrong, that we can talk to someone. If there's something wrong, it's okay.
Yes.
That we're not okay, because that is what keeps us from seeking the help and the attention that we need, or talking to someone, or our parents, or our caregivers. So when we come back, we're going to continue on. We're going to be asking and talking about how can we improve mental health literacy in our community, school, and faith-based organizations. And we'll be talking about those examples. We will be right back with the Roundtable with Tracie Halcrombe. And we're back, and this is the Roundtable with Tracie Halcrombe. And once again, our guest is Kamina Griffin, Tiffany Gibson, Ratoya Mason, and we do have Jane Zeal. And we are still talking about this topic that means so much to me, as well as the ladies sitting here as mental health professionals. Mental health stigma, how are we ending this, as well as the literacy? How are we learning? How are we contributing to the dialogue that needs to be had in our communities? Our question before the break, we wanted to talk about how can we improve mental health literacy in our community, school, and in our faith-based areas in our communities. Let's talk about that. We can start on this end. We're going to give Kamina a break for a moment,
Okay.
Jane.
Well, I would start by talking about the human condition. These feelings affect everybody at some time. Some people have more psychosocial stress, they have more exposure to stress, which can make it more difficult to be resilient. But it is part of the human condition. And again, how you would, in my community, I probably would not take that to a faith-based community. In a Black community, I know the church is everything, and that's a wonderful thing. But it's not necessarily like that in all communities across the country. It can be mean-spirited and competitive as well as loving, right? So I would just really go back to I'm okay, you're okay, this is part of the human condition. Everybody experiences these things at some time. And again, I would switch it, try to get the conversation more to a discussion about the nervous system, what it means to somebody. One episode of exposure to stress is called allostasis, and you go back to the baseline and if life goes on normally. But for too many people, you have an episode of stress and that sympathetic nervous system kicks on, you have all that cortisol, and on your way down back to your baseline, another one, and then another one. And what happens is the baseline shifts. And so people have chronic arousal. A lot of this stress creates inflammation in the body. And then we have the type 2 diabetes and the COPD, and so that's the kind of shift I think the dialogue needs to go to. This is part of the human condition. And it's not like something's wrong with you and not with you, but you're better. None of that stuff.
I think this is very, very important to just stop for a moment. The human condition. There are so many things that we are dealing with daily, be it from all age ranges. We need to definitely seek the help that we need in all regards. If there is a problem, if there is something wrong, please seek the help. We have therapists in our communities. We have counselors in our community, as well as, like Jane just said, some people do talk to their pastor, but we do know a lot of times in our faith-based community that is not always the answer to a diagnosis. That's not the answer to a treatment. So we need to just make sure we're getting the right help at the right time. Ratoya, what would you like to add?
I would just add, when it comes to having the understanding or promoting the fact that it is okay to not be okay. But even in the midst of that, advocating on how do we stabilize when we're not okay? What are some things that we can do to help stabilize ourselves, different techniques, but also in terms of resources. When we think about mental health, it's not necessarily, and I may not be correct when I say this, but we don't necessarily have to look at it as a spiritual type situation. Again, when we normalize that in any capacity, understanding how to respond to that is important. But the bigger part is not necessarily how to respond to it, but being aware of where do we send these people, or send this particular person. And so I'm so excited to be able to sit with you today, because these are some of the avenues and the vehicles that we can use to get the word out. But not only just to get the word out about mental health. Okay, well, now I know about it. Well, how do I get the help? And so also having those resources available. We do have our therapists and our counselors and our social workers. So we have a lot of people in the community that we can be connected to. But we just have to be on one accord in terms of knowing how to direct and when to direct. And that's a way that we get that understanding out in the community.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that with getting the resources out, and Jane had mentioned resilient, and I think that we need to normalize, or everybody is not resilient. Like we have kids and they always say, oh, well, they'll bounce back. But I think as a parent, even I see, I raised 2 kids in the same environment, but they're completely different. And kids get stressed too, just like adults. And sometimes some can bounce back, and sometimes some are traumatized, and it takes them a while. So I think just understanding that and accepting that, and getting your child the help that they need, or when they don't get the help, they become adults. And they have, issues with relationships or issues on their jobs because of something that may have happened to them when they were younger and they didn't get the assistance that they need. So I do think that we just need to normalize that, everyone is not resilient, and just knowing where the resources are, being aware of our feelings and where we can go.
Could I add something? In that part, Tiffany, I just wanted to add that we do know too, even the early onsets, even of mental health, is like years from the adolescence. So what we might be seeing is, oh, they're okay, they're just, they're fine. And then you don't really know that was something that should have been looked into at that point. So the onsets are longer, like 11 years or more in some of the age ranges. So let me hear from you,
Yeah, and that
Kamina.
actually leads into what I was going to say. When it comes to the mental health literacy, preventative care is very important, because we always talk about when somebody needs help, but like you just said, there's signs before it gets to the point where you really need to go see a professional. That's where the training comes into adults. It's like, okay, if I see that my child is exhibiting these subtle signs, let me open the communication up. That's where empathy comes from. Don't put on, like you just said, oh, they're a kid, they're fine. Or when I was their age, I felt like that and I was fine. No, empathy. Talk to them. Say, hey, what's going on? How are you feeling? And think, okay, if I was in that person's shoes, does it make sense that they would feel that way? You don't have to have experienced the same thing to say, does it make sense that they would feel that way? Yes, okay, so let's talk about it. And sometimes just that simple conversation where you feel heard and seen is enough to help you get through whatever trial you're going through. So preventative care is very important. There's self-interventions that we can all do to prevent anything major from happening. There's always triggers and signs. Like, if I'm getting overwhelmed, what are those signs? Do I shut down and not do anything? Do I isolate myself? Do I, distract myself with other things? So that's where the self-awareness comes into play. Getting back into your body, all the things we've all said, all of that comes together so that we can learn how to heal ourselves. And then if we do get to a point where the stress gets too high and we can't get back to equilibrium, then that's when we need to seek a professional and say, hey, I'm stuck. I don't know how to get out of this limbo. But there's a lot of different phases that we go through. And I think with the education, that's important. You don't just wait till you're in distress. There's levels that you can intervene. And I think that's the most important part in doing things like this, in churches having professionals come, in schools having professionals come, and making it fun, making it light, making it, like we said, normal. It's okay. And if we can just make everybody realize it's okay, then we can actually get the needle moving some more.
I agree 100%, and I'm going to come back to you, Ratoya. But what's interesting, and I think the most important thing also to know, as Jane did something like the line and scale, mental health and health is a state of continuum. It is a circle of wellness, illness, wellness, illness until we leave this earth. So we will experience things. We will go through things. It's how we handle them, how we bounce back from them. And as you said, some people are resilient. Not everyone is the same. So we have to accept that everyone is different and everything is case by case. Ratoya.
I appreciate you talking about the continuum of, illness to wellness, because that was the piece that I wanted to speak on. Of course, we work to hopefully erase the stigma of seeking mental health attention in those situations when we're not feeling well. But again, when we equate that to the physical, we have preventative care in the physical. We have wellness checkups. We're not feeling bad. We're just going in to say, hey, are we okay? So even in the continuum of the mental health cycle, understanding that the wellness is important. So I may not be feeling bad today, but how do I maintain that? What are some things that I can do to maintain that space that I'm in, whether that is to still seek the help of a mental health professional. I don't necessarily have to be in a bad space to do that. I can do that just, again, to stay up to date on those tools or whatever it is. So not just talking about mental health when we're not feeling well, but also talking about it when we are feeling well. Like that's still something that's important.
And I'll add, and there's something called adverse childhood experiences, or the ACEs. So I think the more information that parents have, because there are some situations that they are placing their children in that could cause a mental health illness. Because the research says that the more ACEs a person has, the more likely they are to experience or to be diagnosed. So there are just some things that I think parents need to be educated on. Maybe we'll need to go back to that guy, because one of the ACEs is, child watching their mother be with domestic violence. A family member that's in prison, or the absence of a family member or parent. So there are a lot of things that I think that we can help lessen the likelihood of our children experiencing them by not putting them in certain situations.
That was a lot. That was good. This was good. That was a lot, because that just kind of just resonated with me so much. Because yes, the things that we're experiencing majority of the time is often learned behavior. That is what we're saying. It's learned behavior. And some things we pass on not willingly, is by default. So the things that we're experiencing and our children are experiencing, we have to be ever so careful about the positions, the things that they're being exposed to. We hear all the time about how social media, the phones, we've let they call it the enemy just came right in your house through technology with the exposure. So what about that with the social media piece? The kids can't be stable because they want the emulation of everything that's not real.
Right. And I wanted to add to the parent piece, the ego has to be taken out of it to get the child the help. That's the biggest thing I see. Parents don't feel like it's their fault, or we're making it seem like it's their fault. You got to take that ego out of it, because again, we just all agreed that it's part of the human experience and it's natural. And you might have contributed, but it's not a blame game. It's not a fault. It's like, okay, it's here. What do we do? And so when it comes to the social media, it's huge because I deal with a lot of adolescents and they get more depressed because they're seeing all these snapshots of smiles and happiness and success. Young adults, oh, they already have a house. Oh, they already have a family. They're married. Oh, I want a baby. All this stuff. And you have to break that down. You have to break that whole wall down because it's just causing so much because it's just stimulation after stimulation. And that's making changes in the brain. That's making changes in the body. It's deeper than what, we really know. And so that's a big problem. That's a huge problem right now.
What would you say, Tiffany?
I would say it is a huge issue. I was working with someone and I was like, well, what does beautiful look to you and look like to you? And, they pulled out their phone and showed me a picture of someone on the internet. And the girl was gorgeous, but I could tell she's had a lot of work done. So what they see is just that end product. So you have a lot of young ladies who want to be like the Cardi B's, all the people that they're seeing up, not realizing that that's really not their reality every day. So we know everyone put on makeup or we put on a face for certain things and that's what they're doing, or they're getting their bodies made up differently to get that look. And you have a lot of, especially younger girls, who are comparing themselves to people on social media. And I think that is attributing to a lot of the low self-esteem. They don't feel like they fit well in their clothing and that sort of thing. So
Even in their body.
yes, right.
Just adding that's I think that's where the safety piece is important for, I guess, parents when we think about adolescents and the exposure that they have to anything, through social media or what have you. I think that the safety part is important for us as parents when it comes to there has to be boundaries. Like, we have to understand that there are necessary boundaries. I always say that we don't raise kids, we raise adults, and so it's important that those boundaries are there in terms of usage, right? But not only that, but be able to be comfortable, having comfortable conversations, having honest conversations with our children. All those things are important because it does add to or take away from, what they could potentially experience mentally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just, add that parents are a healing resource. And, too often in our culture we have two working parents, and the kids are on the phone. There's no relationship there. There's no safety in relationship. Our brains evolved to be in relationship with others. That's the biological imperative in terms of how we survive, right? So you're looking at an image on a cell phone, and the social comparison without any kind of co-regulation or relationship. And, parents are flying around the house when they come home because they got to pay bills and they have to make dinner and all that. So I just, see kids are just kind of don't have the opportunities for safe connections and building those, relational capacities. And they turn in on themselves. They're not good enough. They don't know, So, yeah, I think technology has been really a disaster for lots of kids.
Well, this has been such a great conversation, and we will be right back with the Roundtable with Tracie Halcrombe in just a few moments. And we're back with the Roundtable with Tracie Halcrombe. And once again, we have great conversation with mental health professionals. We have Kamina Griffin, Tiffany Gibson, Ratoya Mason, and Jane Zeal. And we have been talking about mental health stigma and how can we talk more about literacy in our spaces. So this will probably be our last question because we're going to be wrapping it up. But I want to know from our professionals, what could be done to mitigate stigma and discrimination?
Keep talking about it. We're just going to keep talking about it, having events about it, providing education, trainings, just getting the word out, because that's the only way. We're just going to bug everybody with mental health all the time. And just be open. When somebody is brave enough to come to you, make sure you give them that safe space to continue talking. Because once you shut it down, it's hard to get that confidence back to open up again. So I think that's the biggest thing, just everybody having compassion and empathy towards everybody and understanding everybody's going through something.
I would agree with everything that she said. I know that I'm working on a couple of initiatives, one in my community as well as in the school system that I work in, where we're creating or we're educating students, creating a team of students to educate them, and they will actually be the spokes persons to get the information out. I think that kids learn better by people who are closer to their age or their peers, so letting them be the mouthpiece to get that information out, so they'll know where to go again for help, and as well as continuing to educate the adults that are in the buildings and in our communities.
Yeah, dividing and conquering. That's the best way to get things done. I want the world to be sick of talking about mental health, just as much as we're sick of talking about other topics. I think that is important, is necessary, and that's, as Kamina stated, that's the only way that, one of the ways that we're going to get it done is that we just have to continue to talk about it nonstop.
I wish that there was a term other than mental health, because that itself is so stigmatizing. And I wish we could find some way to discuss health in general, and that there's a mind-body component, and that stress creates inflammation in the body, which is going to create depression, and emphasize that it's part of the human condition, that there's so much we don't know about what makes people well and unwell, and be open and curious about the experience of other people. I also just wanted to add, just in terms of the mental health education component, I've recently read, a couple articles about the link between ultra-processed food and depression. That's huge, right? And so, these people they have what's wrong with me? I have a bad personality. Why am I? And it could just be nutrition. At least nutrition is probably a component to it.
Well, we do know that all of it, it has a part in everything, because we know some things bring us up, something like sugar. Some things take us up, some things take us down. So we have to be very mindful of everything that we're consuming, not only in here, but in the mind too. So whatever we tend to give power to or focus on, we give the power to. So I'm very, very interested in knowing too, I thought that would be the last question, but you guys answered that so well. I think I'm going to ask one more. Again, what is the most effective interventions to reducing stigma? What would you give us some effective interventions so they can know out here, the viewers, what can we do? What are some effective interventions that that's going on right now? I heard you say, just educate. That's my thing, and that's what Joy Inside Tears does. They probably are tired of me talking about mental health. That's all I talk about: mental health awareness and prevention, suicide prevention. But at the end of the day, what are some interventions that that reduce stigma?
Well, I think just treating people like humans and people. I know one thing that I try to do when I talk to people is make them feel seen, like no judgment, that we're on the same level. And I think treating people like humans, I feel like with social media, we've gotten away from that human connectiveness, like we've already said, that it seems like people are about me and self. And we forget that we are supposed to be community. We are supposed to support each other and help each other. So I just can't stress empathy and compassion enough. That's the basis. If you can say, I can understand where you're coming from, I can relate to that feeling, to this situation, maybe not specific circumstance, but I've been there. That's gonna help people feel comfortable enough to open up, and then we won't look at each other like, oh, you're better than me, or you're weaker, I'm stronger, because we're looking at each other on a human level. So I think that's where we have to start to get to any of the other things.
Yeah, I would agree, and I'll still go back to education. That piece is very, very important. But also, especially when I'm dealing with adults, especially parents, talking to them about their children, just letting them know it has nothing to do with parenting. I think that that's what happens with a lot of adults when they don't get the help, their children the help that they need because they think it's a sign or a reflection of their parenting when that is not. So just assuring them that, hey, this has nothing to do with parenting, and this is not that time, for that. We need to go and get this, the child the help that they need. But just making sure, I guess, being more open to listening to them and just reassuring them that it has nothing to do with parenting at that point.
And I think one of the most effective interventions that I can think of is advocacy. We've talked about helping to identify. But when we've identified, even as, am I my brother's keeper, am I my sister's keeper, when we've identified these things, how do we react? What do we do? How do we advocate for individuals? Again, because that's one of the ways that we work to normalize, like, hey, we all go through some stuff. I've been through some things. This is, this may have helped me, or this person may have helped me, or this particular thing may have helped me. That's a part of advocating, on the behalf of our sisters and our brothers. And I think that's an important factor that's going to help to, educate or get the word out in terms of normalizing that mental health factor.
Well, in terms of addressing, the stigma, I would say the World Health Organization says 70% of the determinants of health are outside an individual's control. And the epidemic we have of, depression and anxiety and all that stuff, I would say this is a cultural problem. This is not a problem that lives inside you. I know it's affecting you internally, but, this is a cultural problem.
Cultural contribution is what you're saying. And that is a societal issue.
And Tracie, if I may, and that's where there's a lot of power for help too. Not everything has to be one-on-one counseling. Singing, dancing, storytelling, art, all that stuff just lifts people up, right?
It does. And that just reminded me, I did Joy Inside Tears helped for Mental Health Awareness Month to do an art contest for the teens with Troup County Schools. And the theme was, what does mental health mean to me? It was amazing. We did use the medium. I love art. I love everything about anything that helps us have a freedom of expression and helps us relate to the world as we know it. Well, we have to end our show right now. We're so glad you tuned in. Thank you so much, all the guests that are here today. I just want you to understand and remember to rely on and share trusted sources for information. Speak up if you hear or see someone being stigmatized or harassing others with their comments or any misinformation. Show compassion and support for individuals and communities that are more closely impacted. This is Tracie Halcrombe with the Roundtable, and we want to thank you for tuning in. Never lose hope. Just when you think it's over, God will send you a miracle. No matter what you're going through, no matter what you're dealing with, even if it doesn't look like it's going the way you want it to, even if everything seems to be failing around you, God is in control. Hope inspires us to stand for something good and selfless. To demonstrate passion and commitment. to believe in your dreams, to give people hope, to help them find their strengths. Hope is something that you want to happen. Hope provides a boost of motivation and faith that positive change is coming. And every problem has a solution. When you think about giving up, remind yourself that situations and circumstances does not last forever. Control what you can. Hope can be the difference between giving up and holding on. It's an action we must choose to take on purpose each day. Put your hope in God. And when you start to lose hope, remind yourself of how far you have come.